And we heard horror stories of people who had homes under contract and everything was going along smoothly. And then overnight, they found out that their credit score had plummeted. We heard stories as bad as almost a couple 100 points, right? People going from the 700s down to the 5s because they had all of these student loan debt payments that were coming due or being reported as late because they didn't realize that the forbearance had been lifted and they just had those loans just sitting. And so it was something that really killed. Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home, where we offer expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we'll be discussing the student loan crisis, as well as what it means for many buyers and borrowers out there who are looking to purchase a home now that the federal student loan forbearance ban has ended. Right. So there were a lot of people in the country who were essentially benefiting from dealing with having their student loans in forbearance, right? Essentially on pause, where they're not having to make payments on it. It's still sitting there, depending on the terms of that agreement, or whether or not it's deferred or in forbearance. They may or may not have interest accruing while that's happening, but there's a lot of people who had those payments on pause, and that has now been started back. And it has caused a ripple effect for a lot of buyers who have dealt with issues with those funds coming back, with it hurting their credit score. It also impacts their ability to be able to afford a house in an already unaffordable market. There's a lot of things that have happened. So I wanted to take some time to discuss more about what is happening with the student loan payment and how that has an impact very much so on your ability to be able to purchase a home. As it stands today, there are currently around 43 million people in the United States who have a student loan debt that's associated with them, and the collective amount for that debt is over $1.6 trillion. And so if you just did basic math and kind of divided that up equally amongst these people who owe, that comes out to around 38,000 that each of those borrowers are on the hook for. Now, there's obviously going to be some people who are a little bit more, some who are a little bit less. But we're not talking about chump change here for the average person. When you look at what the student debt was back in, let's say, the mid 80s, right? So the generation prior to us, what the student loan debt looked like then. On average, it was about maybe 5,500, it's a little over 5,000. So you were roughly saying that the debt that people are incurring to go to college is now 8 times what it was 40 years ago or 30 years ago. But when you look at the income earning potential and you say, hey, what was the average income that a college grad was making in the 1980s versus what the average college graduate makes now, that number is only about 3 times as high as what it was, right? You're looking in the 20s to like the mid 60s now in today's market. And so again, you've got a debt crisis that is now 8 times more, but the income earning potential that is only 3 times more. So like there's just a recipe for disaster for this to be a problem that we're dealing with or seeing with a lot of people having to work through for years to come. This is definitely something that isn't going away. We don't foresee colleges getting cheaper any day now. Even when the pandemic was happening, like there wasn't discount programs that were given because we weren't going to class in person. They were still charging full price for online and virtual classes to take place, right? And so it's a tricky situation, a tricky problem. Also, when you consider the fact that because houses are so unaffordable nowadays, it's requiring higher incomes, and most people can only get that higher income with a college degree. And so it's figuring out how does that work if you're from a household where your parents may not be able to afford to send you off and pay for those fees for you. You're having to incur all that debt yourself to be able to make this happen, to be able to give yourself a winning shot to be able to have a chance to buy a home, especially if you're buying a home by yourself. It's even increasingly difficult for people to purchase on their own without another person in the household to be able to contribute. And student loan debt can really factor into your ability to have a chance to even purchase a house in the first place. And so one thing that we've noticed, like I said, the first thing is there are options in place for you to be able to put a pause on your student loan payments if you're trying to build things up. It's not always recommended, right? There's obviously some programs where you can put it on pause and interest isn't accruing. You just have it sitting over there waiting. Or there's other options where you can say, hey, I want to have it on pause, but I know that interest is still kind of tacking up. So that's where you end up or seeing the stories where people have not made a payment, or they graduated 15 years ago and now their debt payment is higher than what it was 15 years ago, right? That's when you start hearing those horror stories. And so when the Biden administration was in office, there were a lot of owners and people, especially after the pandemic had happened, there were a lot of people who owed student loan debt, and they had those loans in forbearance, which means that it was on pause. A lot of times, especially with a pandemic, obviously there's going to be some economic hardships. And so there are a lot of people who could apply for economic hardships and say, hey, we want to have these loans in forbearance and kind of holding. And there was a brief moment where there were a lot of people saying like, hey, we might be able to have these student loans forgiven across the board, right? That was something that that administration was pushing for. Obviously that didn't happen. And now people are starting to realize like, oh my goodness, like we need to make sure we're on top of this. There were a lot of people who kind of got familiar or just used to having those loans just off to the side and didn't realize when that pause was lifted recently. When that pause was lifted earlier this year, a lot of those loans became due every month, just like they always had been. But a lot of people didn't realize that, or they didn't know it. Maybe they did overlook the mail or the email that they received, whatever communication it was, they didn't see it. And so we started in the real estate industry seeing horror stories of people who had student loans in forbearance, just didn't realize that it was over there. It had been sitting and it now had started back up with their payments due. Because they didn't realize that was the case, or they hadn't logged into their account in months, they didn't know that payment was continuing to sit and go late, and that was dinging their credit score. And we heard horror stories of people who had homes under contract and everything was going along smoothly, and then overnight they found out that their credit score had plummeted. We heard stories as bad as almost a couple hundred points, right? People going from the 700s down to the 5s because they had all of these student loan debt payments that were coming due or being reported as late because they didn't realize that the forbearance had been lifted and they just had those loans just sitting. And so it was something that really killed a lot of deals and caused a lot of headache because that is not something that you can just easily get corrected. A lot of times, sometimes you might be able to finagle things, maybe write a letter, but again, that more times than not is not something that is an easy fix or a fix that you can have happen overnight, and it really jacked up a lot of deals. And so that's one thing that you need to be aware of is like, one, or is your loan truly in forbearance? If that's the case, if you set that up, and is that still the case now? You need to be logging into those accounts, seeing when's the next due date, and make sure that you're staying up to date on that because it's a debt payment, it does have an impact, very real impact on your day-to-day credit score. The other thing to keep in mind too is that student loans are not something that you can get rid of through bankruptcy. That is something that the student loan sticks with you for life. The only way you can get rid of it is to pay it off or you die, right? Those are really the only two ways that you're unloading that student loan debt. That is there to stick with you through and through. And so one thing that people have done over the years to kind of help make it easier on themselves is they might try to consolidate a lot of their student loan debt because most of the time, even though it's a big hairy figure that you may owe, a lot of times when you look at the breakdown of it, it's usually split up into small loans, right? Usually often by semester or by a certain loan type. I'd say 4,000 here, 2,000 there, 3,000 here, and they just kind of combine it all into one payment. When you try to consolidate the loan, you might say, hey, I'm doing this just to make it easier and simpler on myself. I might be able to get a better rate in some cases. That might be a reason why some people do that as well. But one thing that I have heard over the years, and that Dave Ramsey says all the time too, is that it's not necessarily getting out of debt is not a math problem. It's more of an emotional thing that you're getting through, right? And so a lot of people will say, "Hey, I'm going to tackle this debt and really get out of this." And the first thing I'm going to do that is to try to consolidate these loans all into one big chunk and then start attacking that chunk instead of having to deal with all the headache of all these little loans. And then I might be able to save a little bit if I get a cheaper interest rate. And while that, yes, mathematically all makes sense, there's a lot of times where people end up just kind of getting in a situation where they feel like it's too much for them to overcome, right? Like I said, I always talk about the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. When you have those loans kind of broken up, wherever you can kind of chip away at them, and it's a little bit easier for you to have small wins along the way, and that motivates you to keep going. But if you've got this big hairy monster of a loan that you're trying to pay off every single month, and you realize that you've been paying the payments for the last 2 years, and you look and it barely looks like it's budged, that's not going to give you a lot of motivation to continue pushing forward, because it's going to take some real effort and grind to get out of that debt hole. And so that's one thing where while it may make mathematical sense to consolidate the loans, it usually doesn't work out well for people who are trying to pay those loans off. The other thing to keep in mind with that is that if you do try to consolidate them, because personal loans or different loans that you may take on with a bank, those aren't the same as student loans in the sense that they are, or they do offer the ability to have them gotten rid of through bankruptcy, right? And so because that is the case, because those loans can be wiped out with a bankruptcy, they often have different terms than a student loan, and they often have far less grace with a borrower, right? The student loan, they know they're going to get their money, right? They're going to stick with you all the way through life, right? And so if you say, "Hey, I'm going through an economic hard time," right? Or "I'm having a little trouble paying my bills right now. Can I put these on hold?" The student loan company is usually going to be a little bit more willing to work with you and allow you to put those loans on hold while you try to get back on track and then pick those payments back up. If you got a personal loan over here, however, they know, again, you have every right and every ability to be able to just declare bankruptcy and wipe that out. Now, declaring bankruptcy, I don't want to make it sound like it's something that is not serious. It is essentially throwing an atom bomb on your credit score, right? It's something that's going to stick there for at least the next 7 years before it finally starts to fall off. And it's going to make it difficult for you to do anything, make it difficult for you to rent, make it difficult for you to get any type of loan, mortgage loan, any type of loan. Is going to be, not want to say impossible, but extremely difficult for you to do that. And so you have to be very careful about getting in that position. But because they know that it's possible that loan could be wiped out with the bankruptcy, they're going to be far less lenient on people when they need a break or need assistance. And so if you make that decision to consolidate those loans, that debt is still going to be coming regardless of whether or not you're going through a difficult time. And so I don't want people to think that, if I just combine it into this one loan, that I'll be good to go and I can kind of pause it if I need to, or if I need some breaks. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is that the student loan debt also plays a very big role in your what they call DTI, your debt to income ratio. This is something that you may not hear about or may not realize it's a thing until you actually go through the process of purchasing a home. That lender knows that the mortgage payment is likely going to be a very big financial burden. It's likely going to be your biggest debt expense that you have in your month-to-month bills. And they want to make sure that you have plenty of cushion in your budget to be able to address all the other things that come along with home ownership and just life in general, right? They want to make sure you have enough to still be able to feed yourself, right? Have enough to pay the utility bills, have enough to pay your car bills or your transportation, whatever it may be. They know there's more than just that house that factors in. And so one way that they try to determine just how much cushion you have in your budget is they look at what's called the debt to income ratio. And so they calculate all of the monthly debt payments that you are responsible for in any given month. And so let's say you have a credit card bill, a car payment, and then a personal loan, right? Let's say you have those three debts and you make payments on those every single month. And let's say the payments for those three things all together equal about $800. Well, they know, okay, if you get this mortgage loan, that's going to tack on another, I don't know, let's say 1,700 on top of that 800 debt payments that you already have every single month, which means that your total debt responsibility each month, if you get that mortgage, would now increase to $2,500 a month in that scenario. Well, in their minds, they're thinking, okay, they need additional funds to pay for everything else happening in life. And so we don't want that number to get above a certain percentage or a certain ratio in that. So they'll say, hey, okay, if they make $7,000 a month, okay, we don't want that number to go past 40% of 7,000, all right? Or they'll say like, hey, we don't want it to go past this certain threshold, just your debt payments, right? So they're always looking to see, okay, what are your monthly debt obligations? Now, again, this is just debt. So this doesn't factor in anything else as far as utilities and food and all those other things. They're just focusing on the debt payments. And so if you didn't have any other debt other than your mortgage, then obviously you have a lot more cushion to keep in mind for your debt to income ratio. When those numbers start to get thrown out of whack is when you start factoring in all the other debt that people have in addition to their student loans. Right. So it might be where it's like hey, they can't go above $3,000 total in debt payments a month. And there are some situations where we run into where someone has like their car, they have a credit card, and when you factor in that mortgage that they're trying to get, they may be right up at the edge. And then you throw in student loans, and that's another $300-$400 a month. Well, now their debt to income ratio is too high and they no longer qualify for that loan, right? And so not only is it important for you to keep in mind that that student loan debt has a very real impact on your credit score, it also has an impact based on how much it is each month. It has a very real impact on what you can afford to purchase for a house. The higher that student loan payment is, the greater impact it has on your debt to income ratio, and the more it lessens your buying power. Right. And so if you can say, hey, let's figure out a way to kind of get this payment a little bit lower to kind of help to give more funds towards the purchase or anything like that, it really takes you sitting down and determining what the numbers are. Excuse me. But I don't want you to think that you can just go into it and as long as you're making your payments every single month, that you don't have to worry about the student loan having an impact on what you can afford or what you qualify for. A big reason why this confuses a lot of people is because when you go to apply for a rental, right, if you're looking to rent out an apartment or a house or something like that, more times than not, the only thing the landlord is looking at is, one, what's your credit score, and two, how much money do you make a month? Is that on average about maybe 3 times more than whatever that rent is? Those are the two main factors that most, not all, but most landlords are looking at. Landlords almost never look into your debt to income ratio. And so that's why it's often a surprise for a lot of people when they go into a situation where they're trying to purchase a home and realize this factor or this formula that they've never had to look at or never had to factor in is now becoming a huge determining factor in whether or not they can qualify for that loan. Right. You could have a situation where you technically make 3 times the rent and you have a great credit score, but you might be up to your eyeballs in debt payments. The landlord doesn't care. As long as they get their money every month, they're fine with that. The bank very much cares about that, and they don't want that number to get over a certain amount. And so there are a lot of times where people are making plenty of money every single month, but because they have so much debt in their lives, even if they're paying off the debt every single month, they still can't qualify for a loan. I've seen debt to income ratios just obliterate people's, especially when you factor in other outside circumstances, like let's say, for example, child support or alimony. We've seen people who are making 6 figures who can qualify for a home 10 times over, or seemingly qualify for a home 10 times over, but because their debt responsibilities are so high, they still can't get into a house or still can't qualify to purchase the home that they want. And so student loan payments are, again, very much an increasing debt problem that we're seeing more and more of. And it's really throwing a wrench into how a lot of these deals are structured and what's happening. And so if you are considering purchasing a home or kind of thinking about it down the road, the first thing you need to do is just make sure that, one, you're paying your payments on time every single month. If you have put them in forbearance or you had them deferred, make sure that you are well aware of those dates when they start back up. And if they started back up, you need to make sure you kind of getting back in the swing of making those payments on time and make sure that it isn't negatively impacting your credit score. If you are considering trying to move that debt or consolidate it or move it to a different area, you need to make sure you have a full understanding of those terms, and also know that you may not have the ability to be able to put that on pause if you reach a difficult time. A lot of those loans have different terms that aren't as gracious as a student loan. So while it may make more mathematical sense, it is something that you do need to be mindful of. You'll do that. And then lastly, make sure that you have a proper understanding of what your debt responsibilities each month are and understand how that can impact what you can afford on a monthly basis. It's still best to talk with a lender just to get a feel for, like, hey, if I were to purchase today, even though I'm not ready, if I were to purchase today, what am I looking at? And that can kind of help give you an idea of, like, okay, here's how I need to pay things down. Here's how I need to change things up. And lastly, if you are considering, I'm all in favor of getting rid of that debt and unloading that debt, but I also want you to understand as well that there are times when you pay off a debt, it can also negatively impact your credit score as well. And so I don't want you to think, oh, great, I paid off my student loan completely, I'm ready to jump back in the water. You may still have to wait a little bit to kind of see how things shake out. It may still be a situation where it might have had a negative impact on your score. And depending on what other factors or things are going on, you might need to still wait a little while, even if you've unloaded that debt completely. I don't think that there would be situations where that would be a huge issue, but again, you just never know, right? There's all different factors that come into play when you're talking about credit scores and debt and the game that's played with that whole ordeal. And so those are things I just wanted you guys to keep in mind. We're really focusing on making sure that buyers are fully aware of what's happening with student loans. And again, it's a problem that we're going to see likely for years to come. College isn't getting any cheaper, and with everything else going on in the world, it's less and less people that can afford to pay cash to go to school. And so I just want to make sure you guys have a full understanding of how that impacts your ability to purchase and what you need to be mindful of. I hope that was helpful for you all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week.